main principle is that, well, as I said last time, in the 1950s, linguists started analyzing errors, okay, to understand the sources of these errors. Okay? Because in the 1950s, the dominant approach at that time was structuralism. So in linguistics in general and behaviorism applied linguistics. So these hypotheses are within behaviorism. Okay? The first one is contrastive analysis that try to analyze the errors. Okay? And its main claim is that learners' errors are due to the interference of their mother tongue. That's why we can talk about the interference of L1 into L2. And in this case, we can talk about positive transfer or negative transfer. Positive transfer if the mother tongue of the learner, and the second or the foreign language share some grammatical features. If they share some grammatical features, then it might be easy to the learner to learn that foreign language structure. Negative transfer is interference. Interference, which means that in negative transfer, the mother tongue does not help. Okay? The mother tongue results, the interference of the mother tongue results in errors. Okay? So we started talking about the contrastive analysis theory, and we said its main claim is that errors are attributable to the interference of the mother tongue, and this can be clearly observed in a foreign accent when people are speaking. At least, so we may not find examples of grammatical errors, but it's very clear to observe the interference of L1 in pronunciation. Okay? We said that the coiner of contrastive analysis is Lado, who said that we have to compare and contrast L1 and L2, the mother tongue of the learners and the foreign language 1. First, to understand the similarities and differences between L1 and L2. And if we identify the similarities and differences, then we can easily predict, okay, the errors that the learner might make, and we can also think of remedial activities, how we can confront, how we can correct and prepare remedial activities to target those errors. Okay? So by comparing and contrasting L1 and L2, we will be familiar with the similarities, the local properties of languages, and the universal properties of languages, and we'll also expect the difficulties that the learner might encounter. Okay? Which means that Lado's objective is to compare the phonology and the grammar and writing system and even culture. Because before Lado, it was like a micro comparison, microlinguistics. There is macrolinguistics and microlinguistics. So microlinguistics is concerned with core linguistics, phonology, morphology, semantics, syntax, etc. Which means that this what was the main objective in the beginning. The main focus was to compare the phonology, morphology, syntax of L1 and L2. Later on, Lado came with this idea of culture. There are some errors that can't be due to phonology, morphology. Sometimes you find grammatically correct structures. The problem is in the culture, the way how the learner thinks. As we'll see some examples. Okay? There are many structures that are correct at the level of grammar, but at the level of semantics, meaning, the culture, that's not the way how native speakers express the meaning. Okay, so for contrastive analysis, L1 can be a barrier, okay, can be a barrier to learn a foreign language. Which means that the scope analysis of contrastive analysis is somehow limited, because it attributes all errors to the interference of L1. So this is one one aspect of criticizing it. Okay? So this is an example where you can easily spot foreign accents in learners. This is an example by Twine, who recorded a French-speaking guy introducing himself when he said, "If the gentleman, will to me make the grand honor to me retain in his service, I shall show him everything that is magnifique to look upon in the beautiful Paris. I speak the English perfectly." So this is this is an example of a French guy speaking English and was introducing himself. So we can easily spot L1 interference in terms of phonology, in terms of the articulation of sounds in particular, and also at the level of vocabulary. Okay, parfaitement, for example, magnifique. So when the learner doesn't find or doesn't know the counterpart word in the target language, he seeks refuge to L1. So the learner, whenever encountered with some difficulty at the level of vocabulary or phonology or semantics, so he seeks refuge to L1. So we'll take some quotes from Lado himself. So as I said earlier, Lado was not confined to micro comparison, just phonology, morphology, syntax, etc. He also talked about the comparison of culture, which means that if L1 culture and L2 culture are different, then it could also be a barrier to the learning of the target language. If people don't share the same cultural attitudes. Okay? So for example, the example I gave you last time, sometimes you're writing in English and you say like, well, a husband in the rural areas is walking and his wife is following him. So for a native speaker, it might be a simple sentence, but for us, we understand that patriarchal society, that hierarchy in the countryside, especially in rural areas when the husband has to walk ahead of the wife. It has some kind of power. Well, this power relationship, which is in the space, the husband should walk first, then the wife. When we are saying this, we are referring to a power relationship. But for native speakers, they may not realize this kind of power relationship. But people, for example, maybe in Algeria, etc., may understand this meaning. Okay? Which means that the structure can be correct. But when it comes to culture, so culture can be a barrier. Okay? Okay? For example, culture and language are like two sides of the same coin, which means they are inseparable. So when English people, for example, say to cross the street, there is culture there, which comes from the crossification of Jesus Christ. Across the street. So we use the language, but we are unaware of its cultural meaning. We say, let's cross the street. Okay? The street or the road is like this, and you cross it like this, which means that you are making a crossification symbol indeed when you cross the street. Okay? So we use that language, but we are not aware of its culture. Right, so Lado added this point of culture. We need to compare, for example, the differences and similarities between the culture of the learner and the foreign culture. If they are quite similar, then I think you are studying intercultural awareness, right? I think you will be talking about some cultures which are reserved, some cultures which are open. There are certain cultures like open in discussions, and you can easily spot the outsiders from the conversation, from etc. Okay, so this affects the learning of foreign language indeed. So according to Lado, we can predict and describe the patterns that will cause difficulty in learning, and those that will not cause difficulty by comparing systematically the language and culture to be learned with the native language and culture of the student. Well, this is the opinion of Lam. We need to compare the language and the culture of the two languages, L1 and L2, so that we can predict the difficulty that the learner might face. And he also says, in the comparison between native and foreign language lies the key to ease or difficulty in foreign language learning. So it all depends on the comparison. If you find similarities, so learning will be easier. So those elements that are similar to the learner's native language will be simple for him, and those elements that are different will be difficult. Of course, this is questionable, as we will see, but anyhow, his main idea is that we need to compare the culture, L1 culture, and the foreign or the target language culture. If we find similarities in terms of culture and in terms of language, which means that the learner or the learning process will be easy and will be simple to the learner. So, this is not mentioned in the booklet, and I'll share it with you. The proponents of contrastive analysis try to come up with level of hierarchy. Well, this is something interesting. How? Normally, when we compare the culture or the language, L1 culture and L1 language in the foreign or the target language culture, we should come up with a certain hierarchy of difficulty, or a level of difficulty, which means that a learner whose culture is similar to the culture of the foreign language is different in terms of the learning capability from a learner whose culture is not similar and is different. Okay? Which means that proponents of contrastive analysis trying to come up with a level of hierarchy. If the learner, for example, if his culture is similar to this culture, so he may not find more difficulty as the others. Now let's talk about this hierarchy of difficulty, level 0, which is transfer. There is no difference or contrast between the two languages. No difference. Well, this is hardly possible because there are no two identical languages. Otherwise, why are they two languages? Okay? That's why it is level 0. Level 0. Okay? It's like conditional 0, which is a fact. That's why many grammarians say that conditional 0 is not a conditional, because it's about a fact. It's similar to that. Level 0, it's called 0 because you can't find two languages which are exactly the same. No difference or contrast between the two languages. Okay? You may find two languages maybe 90% similar. If one language is a version of another language, it could be the case. Okay? For example, English and American English, okay? British English and American English. If we claim that they are two independent languages, if we do claim that they are two independent languages, in that case, it could be the case. But I don't think that there exist two languages which are exactly identical. That's why we're starting with level 0, not level 1. So level 1, coalescence. Coalescence means that two items in the native language become one item in the target language. This is quite easy to the learner. That's why it's level 1. Quite easy. Why? Because if you have two items in your native language and you are learning a target language, and those two items become one in the target language, it's easier than if, as we will see, if there is one item in the language, it becomes two in the target language. You get confused. So this is easier than the second one. When you have two items, they become one in the target language. For example, here we have this requires that learners overlook. So the learners have to forget about that difference between the two items, there is an example. English third person possessive, okay? He and she require gender distinction, his and her. And in Spanish, they don't. In Spanish, there is only su, okay? His and her. So we have two items in English. So if an English person is learning Spanish language, he has to forget this distinction between his and her, because there is only one counterpart in the target language, which is su. Okay? So there are many examples where in one language you have two items, two words, for example, but in the foreign language there is only one word, or only one structure. It could be a word, it could be a grammatical structure. Okay? So this is another example. An English speaker learning French must forget about the distinction between teach and learn, and use just the one word of harmony in French. So in English, we have two words, two items, teach and learn. We say, for example, I'm teaching my children. We don't say I'm learning. This is a common mistake, okay? I teach my children, for example. And there is learn. There is a difference between learn and teach, but in English, in French, there is only one word. So this is a good example to understand that you can have two words or two grammatical structures in the native language. They become coalesced, which means they are combined. Coalesced, they are fused. Okay, and they have only one item in the target language. Remember this, please. This is called coalescence. You will see this in phonology next semester. Coalescence. Two items are coalesced. They become one in a time. We will see the opposite. We will see the opposite, which means that. What's the opposite of this word? Yeah, one word or one item in the native language. It becomes two. And this is more difficult than this one. This is level 1. Because it's easier when you have two items, you just forget about the distinction and you learn only one. The problem is when you have one item, okay, and it becomes two. That's more difficult than this one. Okay? So level 2, under differentiation. An item in the native language is absent in the target language. The learner must avoid that item. You have a certain item in the language, in the native language. It does not exist in the target language. Okay? In Arabic, for example, there is antunna. So there is no antunna in French or in English. You have to forget about that. It does not exist in the target language. Okay? This is a little bit more difficult than the previous one. That's why it is level 2, because the learner can be confused when there is an item in the language that does not exist in the target language. Level 3, reinterpretation, which means you have to reinterpret the meaning or the use of the item that you have in the native language. Reinterpretation, an item that exists in the native language is given a new shape, a new distribution, a new meaning. Okay? For example, an English speaker learning French must learn a new distribution for nasalized vowels. The same thing for Moroccans. You'll see this in phonology as well. There is a rule of nasalization. In French language, when there is a vowel plus a nasal sound, the nasal is not pronounced. It is deleted, and its feature goes to the vowel. So, for example, bon. They don't say bon. So the nasal is deleted, but its feature is not deleted. Its feature, which is nasality, it goes to the vowel, and the vowel becomes nasalized. So with the nasal feature. This is not the case in Arabic, for example. People say hun. examples with the vowel and n. Okay, and the nasal feature is revised.